It was mid-March when a clarity descended upon us that we were dangerously besieged by a deadly agent, and that drastic measures, in many cases highly disruptive to our ways of life, were necessary to protect ourselves and our communities from severe illness, the danger of death, or death itself. My son and his wife had flown on March 13 from New York City to visit us so that he would celebrate his birthday here. And they were anticipating being here maybe 3 to 4 days. So they left all their main belongings in their apartment in New York City. By March 16, it became clear that returning to New York City was a very bad idea. So they packed up their car and they drove off to Seattle, where her mother lives and has this beautiful large property. The agent was highly contagious, unlike anything we've seen before, said Dr. Fauci. Much about it remained unknown or uncertain, and given the events in Italy and Spain, we knew that it could be devastating to a community and that it could overwhelm community resources relied upon to confront the threats it posed to health and life itself. ICUs in diverse parts of the world were being suddenly and rapidly overwhelmed. Health providers were working beyond their limits, many falling prey to the illness and dying. New York would soon be utterly overwhelmed. The characteristics of the illness as described possessed an insidious quality, invading and affecting systems in our bodies that would have been thought to be beyond its reach. A person could look to be on the mend and suddenly collapse irretrievably. Medical practitioners were often at a loss, helpless to provide the assistance needed to save lives. Adding to the ghastliness, those who became severely ill and were hospitalized would be blocked from direct contact with their kin, such that suffering incurred prior to death would take place while loved ones were separated from one another. Its modes of contagion were understood to be multiple and stealthy. You could be infected by the healthy young person, the gate touched by that healthy young person, or the package dropped off on your porch by that healthy young person. By the air the cashier exhaled at the grocery store, the air exhaled by the previous occupant of the elevator, the hand you shook, the pen you had used to jot your initials in a common transaction. It could be droplets expelled, or it could be aerosol hanging in the air from microparticles, moving just as smoke would move. So indeed, this danger appeared stealthy, insidious, seemingly ubiquitous, and potentially deadly. To protect ourselves, we dropped many activities that were central to our ways of life, that involved ordinary communion with others, and we retreated en masse into our respective bunkers for extended quarantines. Bustling cities and centers of traffic suddenly became deserted and desolate. We separated from peers and loved ones, as any of them could bear the agent of suffering and death or be subject to contagion by that agent. We were engaging in novel and highly strange practices, wiping down groceries and packages, leaving packages in our porches and garages for 24 hours to shed the virus, wearing masks and gloves, avoiding proximity to others of 6 feet or less, and stocking up on basic supplies, toilet paper. It was all novel, strange, deeply disruptive, and menacing. It struck me at that time that we were under a state of siege. And I wondered if thinking of it in these terms could provide a model for grasping, anticipating, and confronting the behavioral ill effects of this particular form of danger and threat to our well-being. I want to note here that I'm limiting the topic to the effects of the threat, not the effects of becoming ill by the agent. Behavioral experts on the psychological effects of adverse mass peacetime events were largely experts in disasters and their effects. But these experts readily brought up the ineptness of that model for what we were experiencing. Most disasters affect cities or states, occasionally regions. Even after a catastrophic hurricane, for example, normalcy resumes a few hundred miles away. Not so in a pandemic, said Joe Ruzick, a PTSD researcher at Stanford. In essence, there are no safe zones anymore, he said. Ruzick said, someone struggling with the psychological effects of the pandemic is less like a fire survivor than a domestic violence victim still living with her abuser, or a traumatized soldier still deployed overseas. This expert comes very close to characterizing our situation as a state of siege. Some quick definitions of a state of siege: a military operation in which enemy forces surround a town or building, cutting off essential supplies with the aim of compelling the surrender of those inside. Or another one, to be under criticism, attack, or threat all of the time, a persistent attack. I had never been in a state of siege. The closest thing might have been my internship. Certainly nothing approximating what many of us were experiencing. Thinking of our predicament as a state of siege and comparing it to previous states of siege, I thought could serve heuristic purposes. Asking, is there anything from these scenarios that can help us understand the particular kinds of vulnerabilities that our current situation brings to our behavioral well-being? And to cut to the quick, there's lots of data informing us that there are very significant mental health sequelae to the changes in status generated by the pandemic. A broad body of research links social isolation and loneliness to poor mental health, and data from late March showed that significantly higher shares of people who were sheltering in place reported negative mental health effects resulting from worry or stress related to the coronavirus than among those non-sheltering in place. In particular, isolation and loneliness during the pandemic may present specific mental health risks for households with adolescents and for older adults. The share of older adults age 65 and up reporting negative mental health impacts has increased markedly since March. Polling data shows that women with children under the age of 18 are more likely to report major negative mental health impacts than their male counterparts. Research has long shown that job loss is associated with increased depression, anxiety, distress, low self-esteem, and may lead to higher rates of substance abuse disorder and suicide. Recent polling data shows that more than half of the people who lost income or employment reported negative mental health impacts from worry or stress over coronavirus. And lower income people report higher rates of major negative mental health impacts compared to higher income people. And we haven't even mentioned here the working parents who have children that are supposedly getting schooled remotely, or the increase of abuse that has already been reported to occur when the abuser is in constant proximity to the abused. So my process here for generating these, by the way, I didn't give you the title of this talk, parameters for formulating the psychopathogenic effects of a siege. I think I'm going to be contacted by Hollywood see if they can use that title for a movie. So my process here. I started out implementing, the potential value of formulating the situation in terms of parameters is that it could facilitate forming a case formulation of any specific instance of COVID-19 generated psychopathology, improve our understanding of its pathogenic dynamics and the study of these, and help us identify interventions. I started out simply listing some of the behaviorally impactful features of our situation that I intuitively discerned and cast these as parameters, where an individual or a community may be more or less impacted by the content of that specific parameter. I reviewed discussions on the effect of a pandemic and the effect of these on mental health. In the background of this process, I held as reference a framework of basic human needs as articulated by Peter Osorio and Lori Aylesworth. And I'm going to share that with those with you at this point. And as we go through the parameters and the content of those parameters, I invite you to reference these as you know them. And I did ask one of our moderators to supply you with a couple of documents, so they may have been able to do that. I'm not sure.
I'm actually going to send them out right now, Walter. Sorry for the delay, but everyone can check their email in just a moment and it should arrive.
Okay, so these will be available. This one and the parameters themselves will be available for you to review if you download them, but I will be making reference to them as we go along as well. Here's a good spot for articulating need, a condition which, if unmet, pathology results. Basic human needs, if they are totally unmet, behavior becomes impossible. So again, you can ask yourself to what extent the value of any one parameter constitutes or generates an infringement on the satisfaction of a basic human need. Simply perusing them, we can readily recognize some of these to be blinking red in our recent and current situation. Many have experienced loss of access to central relationships, loss of access to core communities, loss of self-agency, loss of sources of sustenance, loss of order and predictability. Second, I looked at the historical record of a specific state of siege, a military one of a very different character, and looked for similarities and differences with our current situation. In this context, I reviewed the potential to help validate the relevance of the parameters I had articulated, and also sought potentially to identify additional parameters. The contrast between the situations could also help to more clearly highlight the particular features of our own situation. So where we'll start is with the parameters that I initially identified as pertinent to our situation. In this context, I will note, many people who are afflicted by a severe danger, say a recent diagnosis of a potentially lethal cancer, comment on the strange sense of incongruence they experience when they are simply out and about in the community, say going to the grocery store. Everyone is going about their business as usual, checking out the quality of the fruit, thinking about which vegetables they're going to let rot in their fridge, simply going about the business of daily life with ordinary panache. And the afflicted person is among them, feeling like he or she is holding their life in their hands. Everybody's going about things ordinarily, but he or she is not in an ordinary state. This predicament is not so common. It is not common in a pandemic, or more broadly, in a state of siege. The threat to the individual is occurring in the context of a threat to the community. So community states of affairs are broadly and importantly interwoven with the individual's new state of affairs. Hence, community-related parameters must be included in this formulation. This is exploratory. Write out your thoughts and input, and we can, if we have opportunity, we can review these with respect to what your own thoughts are on these parameters. Let's see now. Um, I/C. I've deliberated on this. I really, it's really, my parameters really pertain to I, essentially the individual of interest. But I have contemplated if they might apply to a community as well, to the psychopathogenic effects of a state of siege to a community. But clearly my focus is with the individual. The next parameter, NO, negotiation opportunity. Is there an opportunity to negotiate with the dangerous agent? In this case, the virus is giving us the silent treatment, but certainly that is not the case in other states of siege. Appraised danger. This is the danger posed by the threat agent if one were directly exposed to it without protection. The value we would put in this parameter would be your response to the following question. If I get COVID, I think that the chances I will die from it are multiple choice, low, moderate, high, don't know. And we can certainly appreciate that any one of us may have very different responses to that item. Another one would be if I get COVID-19, I think the chances I'll be badly hurt by it are low, moderate, high, don't know. Certainly we know that with some populations, young children, for example, it's low to minimal. Young people, low. Middle age, it can be more uncertain. And elderly with presence of comorbidities, such as diabetes, overweight, high blood pressure, et cetera, they are significantly more at risk. And a descriptive note here, those phrases from Pete that stick to your head and never go away. Remember, true is what is the case. Real is what we're prepared to act on. The more real this appraisal is to you, the more likely you will be acting according to that appraisal. Seems to have some relevance to some of our recent news. Recognizability. The recognizability of the presence of the threat. I might pause here that we can also explore whether these parameters apply to the psychopathogenesis of a state of danger. But again, I'm focusing it on a state of siege, but like I say, this is exploratory. Is it someone's predicament that the threat is present or known that it may be present, that the person knows that it's present or that it may be present, but that its presence is not recognizable? You know, that's a feature of every scary movie. She goes out, she knows that it's there, some leaves move. She's terrified, thinks that's it. No, it was just the wind. Anyway, that aspect of being in danger and not being able to recognize the danger is a known feature of danger that adds enormously to the stress of danger. In COVID-19, we live in the predicament that a healthy person, one with no symptoms whatsoever, can be a source of transmission. And this has varied over time, but when we started out, we thought that surfaces could be a very high source of transmission. Since then, that's been moderated downward. But indeed, we were wiping down packages. The Amazon person who developed that, who dropped off that package would touch my gate, and I would go out there and I'd open the gate with my foot. Anyway, COVID-19 is a stealthy agent. Appraised imminence. An imminent danger is one that puts the meeting of some basic human needs at high critical risk. Low or remote imminence is quite another story. There is no direct antonym of imminent. It would be something that is the opposite of about to happen. Imminence subsumes the matter of proximity and of intensity of the threat. So if I go to the grocery store, I do take a look and I appraise that there is no imminent threat. Essentially, I'm looking at groups of people. Are other people wearing masks? That sort of thing. I traveled and I'm familiar with the grocery store and how they go about things. I traveled to Utah a few weeks ago, and at the grocery store, there were groups of muscly men who were very proudly mask-free. And so we would go around them, and I found at one point that there was just too much of that, such that at one point I said, "Let's get out of here." Essentially, I was coming upon a greater degree of imminence of threat. So it could be dense groups, a package that I know to have been handled by many, the pen that everyone is using. Or it could be that even though you're asymptomatic, that you've tested positive. At that point, you've got the virus inside you. You've got an imminent threat. Other versions could be that right outside your door, there's a frequent appearance of throngs of unmasked drunken revelers, versus nothing of the sort happening in your neighborhood. And yet you've got that door, but you have that sense that all you need is open that door and you're at imminent risk. It's a very different psychological scenario than it is for many of us here in this group. Other one, concentration of danger. Whether it's highly concentrated or dispersed over time and or place throughout the community. And I'll talk about this one later in relationship to the state of siege that I will be reviewing, which is a military one, and it's the Blitz of London. Duration. Danger is inherently disruptive to our ability to act on our pre-danger behavior potential and priorities, unless your way of life involves dealing with a particular danger as a core choice. And at that point, when it comes to dealing with that danger, it's not disruptive to your way of life. There was a writer who was embedded with the Marines, and he commented how, I think they were in Iraq, that there would be the sound of gunfire, and these Marines would turn in the direction and go toward the direction of the gunfire. So that's not quite within our repertoire. Again, I invite you to be looking at any one of these, thinking of different instances that you may know of it, and to be making a reference to basic human needs and how they may be infringed upon. Access to protection from the threat. So it may be for that abused woman who is in an abusive relationship, that she know the number of the domestic violence shelter. Do we have masks? Do we have access to testing and medical care? Do we have enough distance and disengagement from the threat? Again, you can put different values in these parameters, and you're going to be getting a different profile of psychological effects. Confidence in protection. This mask, this bunker, this degree of physical distance will effectively protect me, you may say. Sadly, Joe Biden may be having second thoughts about the confidence he held in the 12 feet distance he had from Donald Trump. If you consider that it was 90 minutes of bellicose speech, and that the movement of an aerosol form of the virus is akin to the movement of smoke. If Donald Trump had been smoking, would the smoke have reached Biden? Eligibility to choose level of danger presence, level of threat presence. I can work from home is at one end. The other end, I must work at the nursing home. And I don't have a viable choice to do otherwise. Eligibility to choose level of self-protection. Some workers had to work at the nursing home and were not provided adequate PPE, personal protective equipment. Threat protection generated strains. This is a catch-all category. To protect ourselves from the siege, from the danger, we must adopt measures that constitute or generate infringements on our basic human needs. We need to shelter, have needed to shelter in place at different times. And we have suffered loss of access to loved ones, loss of access to valued statuses in work and other situations in which we engage in our core social practices, loss of work, loss of income, loss of security for many, loss of access to important segments of the community at large, working at home with kids, failing to meet standards in both domains, work and child raising. For some people, loss of privacy, agency, autonomy. The familiarity versus strangeness domain, the oddness of wearing masks, wiping groceries. There's been a great deal of strangeness at the micro and macro level. Or it could be that there has been no significant changes to your way of life. I have some patients who are very restricted in their way of life due to a variety of conditions and who are isolative and fearful. And I've joked with them that, hey, we're catching up with you. We're getting to see things your way. And it's been interesting to see they are not as stressed by this situation because their world has already been pretty limited. So when it comes to these threat protection generated strains and the infringements on satisfaction of basic human needs, here basically you would go through an individual situation and review those and identify which human needs are being impacted adversely. Compensatory eligibilities. Now, do we know of a way that we are compensating for these issues, for these problems, for these infringements? I think there's one that begins with a Z, and it's a one-syllable word that we're all relying upon. So Zoom is one. That's one of the ways that we're compensating for the restrictions on our statuses. And there'll be more that I'll speak about this in reference to the Blitz. Relevant predispositions, and these are basically identified ad hoc. And I just put in two there because they're so specific to the situation. One is risk tolerance. What predisposition does a person have toward tolerance of risk? And within the normal domain, there's a pretty broad range there. And the other one is risk appraisal competence. Some people are likely to see risk more than they need to. Others are likely to not see risk, not recognize risk sufficiently. And from there on, we can go on. And this is another catch-all. The relevant predispositions. Is somebody highly social, where being out there, relating to groups at large has been just a core aspect of their identity, and they no longer have that? Or have they been somewhat isolative, like my patients that I've referred to, where it's not making that big of a difference for them? Is it somebody with OCD, and that package is delivered? Is there somebody who has OCD perhaps and discovers that they were exposed to the virus, that they were exposed to someone who had the virus, and can't stop thinking, is ruminating obsessively on the potential that the virus has invaded them, their body or their world? Okay, now community leadership responsiveness. I'll be talking about this one, especially when we get to the siege, but we certainly know that because this is a community event, the quality of leadership of the community has a great impact on our own status in relationship to this. Like I say, I'll speak of this with more specificity when we get to the Blitz. Let me see how we're doing with time. Okay. Appraised reliability of sources of information regarding the threat. Faith in the doctor, the president, the CDC. How much faith, how much skepticism, how much cynicism there may be. If there's someone that you can have more faith in, then you're going to have more order and predictability. If you don't feel that you can rely on anyone there, you're going to be less order and predictability. And the last one here is concurrence with community mission, community standards of danger adaptation. Among the options there is this mask thing is intolerable bullshit. Another option is this not wearing a mask thing is intolerable bullshit. Think of living in a community with very different standards from your own. These danger adaptations reflect a community standard and a community mission. How that is articulated and validated is going to make a big difference in your sense of belongingness to the community. As I said, you can play around doing a case formulation on yourself or on someone you know. When I spoke of concentration, you might ask yourself, do you know anybody who's been affected by the virus? And again, think of someone who knows lots of people in their block, in their family, and think of many of us where we may know no one, or have just a very remote knowledge of someone that we know. So, okay, we're going to talk about now The Blitz of London by Hitler's Luftwaffe. Seemingly a very different kind of siege. Let's see what kind of similarities and differences we find. And see if there's anything we can learn from it. The author I relied upon is Erik Larson, writer of The Splendid and the Vile, a saga of Churchill, family, and defiance during the Blitz. He was the author of Devil in the White City, a very popular book some years ago. He moves to New York and he thinks of 9/11. And his thinking goes to London and the German aerial assault of 1940-41. 41, and he wonders how on earth anyone could have endured it. 57 consecutive nights of bombing, followed by an intensifying series of nighttime raids. So here we have readily the duration parameter as something that has a particular value. Negotiation opportunity. Yes, there was. Hitler was proposing negotiation, and it was debated. And at one point, there was a 29%, 29% of the population were in favor of negotiating with Hitler. Appraised danger. It was pretty clear. If you were hit by a bomb, you were probably going to die or be maimed. 40,000 would die, mostly in the capital. More than 1 million houses were destroyed or damaged. I'm going to hopscotch across parameters here. I'm going to move now to the leadership and the generation information parameters. Our level of fear and the quality of our self-protective measures are governed by our own observations and the word from our leaders, scientific and political. Our confidence is based on the appraised reliability of these words. Our leaders during a siege also help form a community mission, and with that, the validity of the self-protection measures that are proposed. Let's compare the values of these parameters affecting the communities of which we speak here. It was widely believed that London would be reduced to rubble within minutes of war being declared, wrote one official. Raids would cause such terror among the survivors that millions would go insane. London for several days will be one vast raving bedlam, wrote J.C. Fuller, a military theorist in 1923. An invasion by parachuters was anticipated, as were gas attacks. Towns and villages took down street signs and limited the sale of maps to people holding police-issued permits. Farmers left old cars and trucks in their fields as obstacles against gliders laden with soldiers. The government issued 35 million gas masks to civilians who carried them to work and church and kept them at their bedsides. Now, it turned out that this was what was anticipated was quite unlike the reality that materialized. On April 13, Robert Redfield, the director of the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention, appeared on the Today Show and assured viewers that the worst was nearly behind us. It had been a month since the last gathering of fans in an NBA arena, a month since the fateful week when Americans began panic buying bottled water and canned beans and toilet paper. The segment's host, Savannah Guthrie, was broadcasting from her home in upstate New York. With the light of a makeshift camera reflecting in her glasses, she asked Redfield to address reports that we could be facing another 3 weeks of social distancing. We are nearing the peak right now, Redfield told her. Clearly, we are stabilizing in terms of the state of this outbreak. By July, the number of daily cases had doubled. The death toll had shot past 100,000. As Redfield looked ahead, his tone became more ominous. The fall and the winter, he said in an interview with the Journal of the American Medical Association, quote, are going to be probably one of the most difficult times that we've experienced in American public health. It is now widely accepted among experts that the United States is primed for a surge in cases at a uniquely perilous moment in our national history. Essentially, pandemics and states of siege, after all, are confusing. The World Health Organization claimed that asymptomatic spread of the virus is very rare, only to clarify the next day after a barrage of criticism that we don't actually have that answer yet. CDC told Americans to prepare for disruption to everyday life that may be severe, then just days later said, the American public needs to go on with their normal lives. And then it went mostly dark for the 3 months. Our understanding of our situation has evolved greatly. We're not wiping down the groceries. What underlying conditions place us in greater danger is better understood. We understand the importance of masks, yet, and I've got this picture here of this rally that our president has held not long ago that has thousands of people all together. So we all know of Churchill's fabled leadership. Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization. Upon it depends our own British life and the long continuity of our institutions and our empire. The whole fury and might of the enemy must very soon be turned on us. It goes on. If we can stand up to him, all Europe may be free and the life of the world may move forward into broad, sunlit uplands. But if we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, including all that we have known and cared for, will sink into the abyss of a new dark age, made more sinister and perhaps more protracted by the lights of perverted science. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties and so bear ourselves that if the empire and its commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say this was their finest hour. So the leader in that instance hones a community identity and he formulates a community mission. Hardships associated with sacrifice and self-protection acquire a meaning, not only serving the individual survival, but the community survival. And enduring these hardships heightens the individual's sense of belongingness to the broader community and its mission. So we can look here at, look at the basic human needs on belongingness and compare that to our current situation. Despite the attacks, defeat in Norway and France, and the threat of invasion, overall morale remained high. A Gallup poll found only 3% of Britons expected to lose the war in May 1940. Another found an 88% approval rating for Churchill in July, and a third found 89% support for his leadership in October. Very different value for that parameter there on community leadership responsiveness. Imminence. We'll switch up to the imminence parameter. With the Germans' shift to night raids, life in London became compressed into the Blitz started out with daytime attacks, but then they shifted to night raids. London life became compressed into the hours of daylight, which as autumn advanced began to shrink with the dreadful ineluctability, all the faster because of the city's northern latitude. The raids generated a paradox. The odds that any one person would die on any one night were slim, but the odds that someone somewhere in London would die were 100%. Safety was a product of luck alone. So luck was not on your side when you bought a lottery ticket, but luck was on your side in this situation.
Just to remind you, we've got about 12 minutes left.
Thank you. Civilians watched their battles unfold from the safety of their gardens while strolling village streets and picnicking in bucolic meadows. The onset of night became a source of dread, but during daytime, life took on a strange normalcy. For the public watching from below, where they would see these fights between the airplanes, the bringing down of raiders has a psychological effect immensely greater than the military advantage gained, commented one observer. Recognizability, initially that was pretty straightforward, and plus there were alarms. But then the nighttime raids, and that shifted it some. But then the Luftwaffe began deploying bombs known as parachute mines, which drifted wherever the wind carried them, loaded with 1,500 pounds of high explosive, and they could destroy everything and everyone within a 500-yard radius. The measures for self-protection and the strains they generated. Strict blackout rules darkened the streets. People could hardly recognize each other or see each other at train stations after dark. Londoners who fled to shelters found them poorly equipped for slumber because civil defense planners had not anticipated that air raids would be conducted at night. A survey found that 31% of respondents reporting getting no sleep on the night of September 11. Another 32% got less than 4 hours. Only 15% said they slept more than 6. Conversation was devoted to one topic only: where and how to sleep. It's not the bombs I'm scared of anymore, it's the weariness, wrote a civil servant. Trying to work and concentrate with your eyes sticking out of your head like hat pins after being up all night. I'd die in my sleep happily if only I could sleep. Many Londoners were surprised by their own resilience. Finding that we can take it is a great relief to most of us, she wrote on September 22. I think that each one of us was secretly afraid that we wouldn't be able to, that we would rush shrieking to shelter and that his nerve would give and that we would in some way collapse, so that this has been a pleasant surprise. Indeed, the intensity of the bombing was not as great as pre-war expectations. There was no psychiatric crisis. An American witness wrote, "By every test and measure I am able to apply, these people are staunch to the bone and won't quit. The British are stronger and in a better position than they were at its beginning." People refer to air raids as if they were weather, stating that a day was very blitzy. But the persistence of the raids generated a darker effect. One writer wrote, "I'm getting a burying phobia, result of having seen so many houses and blocks of flats reduced to piles of ruins from which people can't be extracted in time to live. And I feel I would rather sleep in the street, but I know I mustn't do this." Many Londoners began complaining of gastrointestinal distress, a condition called siren stomach. Rationing was an irritant. The total absence of eggs in stores. Women found tampons increasingly difficult to acquire. At least one brand of toilet paper was also in perilously short supply, as the king himself discovered. Compensatory eligibilities. In situations of high intensity danger, the contest between the pursuit of short-term certainties versus long-term possibilities becomes acutely heightened. In London, short-term certainties gained the upper hand. I'm reading here. What the attacks on London seemed clearly to unleash was a new sexuality. As bombs fell, libidos soared. No one wanted to be alone. You heard respectable young ladies saying to their escorts, "I'm not going home unless you promise to spend the night." One young American woman newly arrived in London marveled at the vibrance of her social life. The only thing people seem scared about here is being lonely, so they date up way ahead of time to ensure against an evening alone. Condoms were readily available, diaphragms too. A popular guide to sex was banned, became widely available. A writer wrote, "Everyone was in love with life and living. For the young, it was undeniably exciting and stimulating. It was God's gift." I'm reading here. "It was God's gift to naughty girls. For from the moment the sirens went, they were not expected to get home until morning when the all clear sounded. In fact, they were urged to stay where they were. Young people were reluctant to contemplate death without having shared their bodies with someone else. It was sex at its sweetest, not for money or marriage, but for love of being alive and wanting to give." Okay, enough on this. I take it that this has not been a particularly strong effect of our current state of siege. Again, it doesn't have that kind of intensity. And I'm going to go back to the to the morale issue of that Londoners had very good morale. That morale was good, and it was largely because the concentration of danger was not high. It was widely dispersed throughout London and through the country. It was not until a smaller community, Coventry, was bombed horribly that then morale took a big hit. So essentially, the town of Coventry, under concentrated attack, the observers noted a widespread sense of dislocation and depression in Coventry. The dislocation is so total in the town that people feel that the town itself is killed. National morale did suffer then when the concentration was such, the concentration of the danger and the imminence of the danger and the harm resulted in the near annihilation of a city.
Walter, we're up with just 5 minutes and we do have a question.
Okay. So just to summarize, an author wrote, in this case, it's the loss of a way of life for Melanie, of the ability to meet up with your friends and extended family, perhaps a loss of trust in our government, the loss of our freedom to move about in our daily life as we used to, the loss of high quality education or the overall education what we're used to. It's the loss of rituals, weddings, graduation, and funerals, and even lesser rituals, such as going to the gym. These were all things we were attached to and fond of, and they're gone right now. So the loss is ambiguous. It's not a death, but it's a major loss. What we have been used to has been taken away from us. I wish I had had the time and opportunity to do the case formulation of a given individual, but instead of that, I invite you to do your own of yourselves and others.